So the topic today is avalanche search and rescue, and we'll go through a few different techniques, some of which might be review, and for some of you it might be some updates there. So hopefully everybody takes something away from the next couple hours. We'll try and take a break just right in the middle of it there, stretch our legs a little bit. So yeah, as Walter said, I'm a mountain guide based in Canmore. I've been working with this, the CAA Avalanche Search and Rescue program that we started developing in 2007-ish there, and we're still carrying on developing it and trying to improve things. And we're using, we try and adopt best practices in that program. It just makes sense, right? There's things happening all over the world, internationally, and within Canada and the U.S. So we try and stay on top of that. And if anybody has any comments, I think we have a mic probably that can get passed around here a little bit if folks have comments that they want to make at any point or have questions. So how many here in the crowd have taken or instruct the AvSAR Advanced Skills program? So quite a few. Okay. If any of you want to come up and have a crack at this, you can take a section. Walter. Walter's an excellent instructor, actually. So for the agenda here, is there anything in particular that you want covered? Like you have a burning need in your business or in your teaching or your operation that you really want to get out of the next couple hours? Anything in particular? Okay, shoveling. Okay, we'll go through that for sure. Yep, yeah, we can talk about that too. So maybe we'll circle back to that. So remind me before we're done here. We'll talk about some techniques for when there's not a whole lot of snow. That's actually a good idea. I'll write that down here. Okay. And then, anything else? Anything else come to mind for avalanche search and rescue related techniques, equipment, training? We're not going to, run a full dog training program here or anything like that. Not my area of expertise. So for the agenda here, first of all, we're going to talk about, actually, to steal Reco's term, we're going to talk about being searchable as kind of an important thing for us. There's certain things that we can control when we're out there doing the work that we do in all these various parts of the industry. And part of it, I think, is on us to actually make ourselves searchable, right? So if we're having the issue, we're the one buried in the snow, missing, in action, that we can actually be found more easily and more quickly. And there's I think a few things that we can do for that. And then to play up more on that, we're going to just talk a little bit about Reco as a technology that's out there. Deep burials, we'll do an overview of deep burial techniques. Multiple burials, and so that includes close proximity and very close proximity burials. So we're calling close proximity burials when there's multiples, more than probably two transceivers buried within 10 to 15 meters of each other, more than a few subjects within about 10 to 15 meters of each other. And then very close proximity burials, which can be another difficult problem to solve in avalanche search and rescue, is when we have multiples within 5 meters or less of each other. We'll talk about shoveling. And some of the, I'd say they're nuanced changes right now, but because we've been doing kind of a very similar shoveling technique for many years now, over a decade, but some tweaks to that. And then if we have time, we'll talk about some of the other topics here too. So I'll just open up with being searchable. So if I'm out guiding or doing SAR work, or I'm on a recreational ski tour with my family, out ice climbing, a lot of the onus is on me to make it so that people and dogs can find me. So, you know, what are the ways right now that we get found? Just shout it out. Transceivers, yep, that's an obvious one. Does everybody wear a transceiver here when they're out in the mountain and snow environment? Is there anybody here that doesn't wear one at times? Like ice climbing? Yeah, there's times. Yeah, what kind of activity?
Ice climbing, but generally just few multi-pitches, maybe canyon, ice climbing in a canyon.
Okay,
That's when I wouldn't bring my beacon in,
Like when there's really no overhead hazard that you're worried about for avalanches?
pretty much.
Yeah. Okay, so transceiver is definitely a really good thing to have on us, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec. How are other ways that we can be searched and found? Reco, yep, for sure. What are some other ways that we get located in if we're involved in an avalanche? Visual, yep. So we shouldn't forget that, right? So people will commonly nowadays do with their transceiver what they do with their smartphones, right? Which is just stare at it and not pay attention to anything else that's going around us, right? We see that people they're like zombies in airports, that sort of thing, and they're running into each other and falling into fountains and getting hit by cars, all that kind of stuff. So we don't want to do that with our transceivers, right? So a visual sweep, a visual search of the area is quite important. And I think all of us have heard of cases where that's how the subject was actually located, right? A part of them was sticking out. You know, a glove sticking out of the snow, and you go and you pull on it, hopefully, and then there's fingers in it. Okay, well, if you're looking for one person, the job's done. You don't even need to use your transceiver. So visual sweep. What other ways do we get found if we're involved in avalanches?
Probing and spot probing?
Yep, probing, for sure. Sticking a stick in the snow. It's been like that for a long time. We've got some, minor changes to the way we do probe lines. And probe lines are probably not practiced enough, because it comes down to that. You want to actually know how to do it well. So it's just search, and the way we probe is set up for probability of detection. Right? There's been some computer modeling and practicing that's been done around the world to determine what is the best way to stick that stick in the snow and have us line up. So it's probably not the best time to do it when you are in the heat of the moment and saying, okay, we've got to, the only way we feel we're going to find this person is by probing, and now how do we do it? Right? So training ahead of time and having some consistency in our probing techniques. How about, any other thoughts on how we get found? Dogs. Thank you. Yeah, and so the dog teams out there, they're amazingly dedicated, and they haven't had a lot of luck with live fines in Canada, and they're still incredibly dedicated to it. So how many folks here are involved in the room are involved with dog programs, dog handling? Okay, let's just give them a bit of a round of applause. So we want to, just like the dogs get rewarded, we want to reward the handlers too, right? Exactly. Do you need a mic for that? No. Okay, so being searchable. So things like having reco tabs, right, in our clothing, in our equipment. I was out biking with Martin Buckheim. Is Martin here right now? Yesterday, and he's wearing a bike helmet, a POC bike helmet, and I said, "You got Reco in your helmet?" And he's like, "Really?" And I'm like, "Well, it says Reco on the back of it there, right?" And I think he'd forgotten that he had it in there, right? So that's the kind of thing we want to get to, that point where we've forgotten that we're searchable, but we are quite searchable out there. And so multiple ways to be found is a good idea, for sure, because one technique may, in a given situation, one piece of equipment or technology might not actually be the thing that finds us. So yeah, multiple ways So we want to be very searchable. So that brings us to, so in terms of reco tabs and clothing, do you think that it interferes with your transceiver? Does anybody think that reco is, the little tabs there are going to interfere with your transceiver sending or receiving? It doesn't. So Ortovox makes transceivers with a reco tab built into the case. So it's not a source of, it's very small. It's not it's an electronic diode inside a little flat antenna, basically for reflecting the radar signal. But it doesn't have any effect, negligible effect on the transceiver sending or searching. So good idea to have those on us in addition to wearing our transceiver when we're out there. And maybe, I don't know, a stake in your pocket or something like that, where the dog will be a little more prone to come find you, too. So that brings us to transceivers. So just as a show of hands here, how many people wear, generally, and you might do both, but generally wear their transceiver in the harness that it comes with? Quite a few, that's good. And then how many people wear it in a pants pocket or a zippered jacket pocket or a pocket that's made for that? So yeah, kind of a good mix here. And how many people do a little bit of both, depending on the situation that they're in? Yeah, awesome. So I've been thinking probably too much about this stuff, and my thoughts are that I can't find a reason right now. It's very rare that I would not wear the transceiver in the harness, in the manufacturer's harness. That's basically the way it comes from the manufacturer. They're saying it's going to hopefully stay attached to your body while you're in an avalanche. So that's probably the best way to go. And there are a whole bunch of reasons that when I've talked to people about this, professionals about this, and recreational folks, why they wouldn't do that. But to me, the default position is you wear it in the harness. And that's for a few reasons. One is, if you think about it, what are people searching for on the surface? Are they searching for you, or are they searching for your transceiver when they're doing a transceiver search? They're searching for the thing that's beeping off of you, right? And so if they're pretty good with their transceiver, which hopefully they are, and if they're pretty good with their pinpoint probing, and then they shovel down to you, what are they likely going to find? They're going to find your transceiver. And so if you put that closer to your airway, you're going to be reducing the amount of time for them to get to you where you may or may not have air and you may have injuries. So I think it's a good idea to carry it quite high and on your chest, maybe a little bit off to the side under your arm a bit, and it kind of stays out of the way there. For carrying it on your chest, we also are more prone, I think, to protecting that transceiver than if it's in a pocket somewhere, or especially in a pants pocket or a leg pocket. How many people here have heard of leg injuries related to avalanche involvements? Here, yeah, it's pretty common. So if you're taking a ride in an avalanche, are you thinking, I'm going to cover my leg pocket? No, you're looking after your airway, your vital organs. You're in that sort of fight or flight kind of reaction, right? Somebody goes to punch you in the face, you don't cover your leg pocket. So another reason I think it's reasonable to carry it, most reasonable to carry it in the harness in a more protected way, because the side effect of you taking a ride in an avalanche and trying to protect yourself and your important bits as you're riding down on the slope and possibly through trees or over cliffs or hitting rocks or whatever might be happening to you traumatically there. And trauma is a fairly high percentage of avalanche fatalities in Canada. Therefore, one could assume that transceivers are going to get banged about a little bit more potentially too at the same time as our bodies are. So consider that again, carrying it in the harness, just because you're going to be protecting that transceiver because you feel we are searchable in other ways, like we just talked about, but if you come to rest in an avalanche, you're really hoping that there's people on the surface with search transceivers and that you're sending with your transceiver. Vital data. So how many people here have a transceiver that has a vital data capability? Yeah, quite a few, right? So it's one manufacturer is using that. And so if you raised your hand there and you carry it in a leg pocket, the manual says for the BerryVox transceivers that you are negating that function, that feature of your transceiver. Because it's based on the accelerometer that's in the transceiver, right? Motion detection. It doesn't actually detect a pulse on you, it detects motion. And so if your transceiver is encased in your leg pocket, there's going to be a lower likelihood, I think, that you're going to be able to be moving that transceiver to transmit that vital data up to the search transceivers. So just another reason to consider having it where your chest is going to be, hopefully most likely to be moving more so than your leg encased in quite firm snow. And there's been a number of cases where transceivers have been lost, ripped out of their pockets, and also when they're on people's chests too, right? That can happen still. It's not a given that you're protecting it 100%. But it actually has been physically ripped out of pockets that were made to hold transceivers. And then we've heard of a number of cases where it's hard to tell if they were by accident on search in their pocket or if it got bumped to search. So again, the more you knock these little electronic devices about, the more chance that a switch is going to get flipped, and now you're in search mode with your transceiver instead of send mode. Some have revert to send as well, but there's a possibility that if it gets banged enough that revert to send feature doesn't work for you either. So now you're searching and everybody else is searching for you too. So it makes you less searchable at that point. And then I think what some of you might be thinking about is interference, right? Because we have these other things. We carry radios, we carry phones with us. And so I hear a lot of professionals saying they don't want to carry their transceiver in the harness because it's closer to where they have their radio and their other electronics. So what are we looking for generally when we're sending for separation from electronics? About 20 centimeters. That's not very far, right, to have that separation. So I think if I got my transceiver on one side of me and my radio on the other side, then I think I have that separation that I need. And my thoughts are that VHF radio interferes less than some other technologies. As we move more to digital radios, though, be very, very careful with that, with digital radio transmissions and interference with transceivers. So what I do is I wear my transceiver, I'm telling you I think that you should wear it the way the manufacturer says in the harness, but I actually wear it backwards and I wear it on the other side of my chest. Because I don't think the manufacturers of clothing and the manufacturers of transceivers, and some of them make both of those things, but maybe those departments don't talk to each other very well. So we end up having radio pockets for right-handed people, because the bulk of the population is right-handed, so they think people want to grab their radio and push to talk with their right hand. So it ends up on the left side of your chest, those pockets that are specifically made for your radios. But the transceiver manufacturers also think the same thing. They want you to be able to operate that clip and access your transceiver on the left side of your chest too. So I just move it around to the right side, put it over my other shoulder, and now I have that separation. So just another thing to think about for where you're wearing your transceiver. Question?
Just a comment there, Jordy. And that 20 centimeters is like super conservative, so there's a built-in safety factor there. It's like 2 centimeters that the interference is going to be caused.
Don't have them touching each other. Yeah. Yeah, good point.
Can you comment on heated socks, heated gloves with interference?
Yeah, 20 centimeters. But if you think about you're wearing heated gloves and now you're searching with your transceiver, yeah, we're saying 50 centimeters, minimum, and no Bluetoothing, no Wi-Fiing, no, that kind of, that technology at all when you're out there, whether you're searching or sending. But if you're searching with a heated glove on that is activated, your transceiver might be doing some really funky stuff. Yeah, so just in general, interference issues are becoming more and more of an issue. And as new bits and pieces, magnetic closures on clothing, most of the transceivers that are out there, we feel like it's a switch, like you're turning on a light and connecting a power switch, but it's actually often a magnetic switch that's enabled there. And so now you throw magnets into it, and it's anybody's guess. So that's why when we put a whole bunch of transceivers in a bag to go do training, they start turning each other on and off because of the magnetic switches, and also they have speakers which have magnets in them too, and they're rubbing against each other and turning themselves on and off all the time. I don't know if any of you experienced that during training sessions. Well, not everybody walks around with 20 transceivers in a backpack, but we tend to do that quite a bit. Any other comments and questions on where to wear your transceiver, being searchable, interference? Okay, so we'll move along here. Just a brief overview of RECO. So I think it's an important technology. It's a very passive technology. It's a very inexpensive technology for us to wear and use in our everyday work and recreation. So again, have more of it, but try not to have it on things like ball caps, where that's the first thing that's going to get jettisoned in an avalanche, right? So stuff that's fairly attached to us is a good idea with the RECO tabs, with the RECO technology there. I was involved in 2007 as a searcher at Revelstoke Mountain Resort. And fellow, I don't know if any of you remember that, it was December 22nd, 2007. Did anybody here respond to that incident? Troy, Kyle, a few folks. Yeah, so there was multiple agencies involved there. Ski Patrol at Revelstoke Mountain Resort. And so that was the day they opened up the new resort. And somebody went missing, presumably in bounds from the last point seen, but kind of unknown at that point. Skiers left from the top chair there, the Stoke chair. And so their searchers were working on it. I think, Troy, you worked a whole bunch on that, eh? Yeah, days and days. And one of the things that hampered the search teams was that it snowed and was windy for days there, especially the day that the subject went missing. And so on day 3 of the search, so that was December 22nd, kind of in the morning there, before, like within the first few hours of being open as a new ski resort. And so what most of you have the luxury at your ski resorts, they've been operating for many, many years, and you kind of know where people get funneled and where they end up. And to the credit of RMR, it was new, right? So they didn't really have that history. Now you get history kind of every third day or so at RMR, where people, they see the sign that says back to the resort or night in the woods, and they seem to choose the night in the woods quite a bit. But so it was unknown if this fellow who went missing and was supposedly, reported by his friends to follow the rules, not go out of bounds. He would never have done that. He was wearing a helmet, all those things. And so it wasn't an avalanche, but it was a search, and it went on for several days. So that was December 22nd where it started, and then I ended up getting called on Christmas Eve to come in on Christmas Day and assist, because there was a whole bunch of people from being tired from searching, and they just needed some more folks on the ground there. And so the plan at that point was, when I got my briefing on Christmas morning, along with a bunch of other searchers, was to track out areas of where he likely would have gone missing. That part of the mountain had been closed, so inbounds areas had been closed, so the search could carry on without having skiers shooting through it. So they've also lost a piece of their terrain too at the brand new resort, and they've lost one of their clients who bought a ski pass. And obviously the family, I think he was 24-ish, if I recall. Yeah, young guy from Edmonton, I think. And obviously the family's distraught, and everybody wants him found. Even if at that point multiple days later, it's not looking very good to have a live recovery. But so we were talking about in our briefing in the morning, like you get on any SAR briefing, what the plan is for search. And so we were asked to go track up an area for the dogs to work, because the dogs were having trouble moving around in the deep snow. So yeah, it was really hampering the dog search. Reco had been used, I believe, from the air, but the Reco, the R9 unit, it was actually the R8, I think they were using at the time, with the big kind of waffle antenna on it, and headphones only, no speaker. It picks up a lot of stuff when you're using it out of the helicopter. So there's a whole video with Reco on how, which I'm not going to get into, about how to set yourself up, and you pretty much almost suspend yourself out of the helicopter and do smaller sweeps so that you're not hitting off the helicopter and getting interference. And then knowing what's interference and what's not interference is important in our training with Reco. And so I don't believe at that time Reco had been used on the ground. And I think, as being a new ski hill, there wasn't a Reco on site, but it had been donated by, I believe, Jim Bay, and his consulting firm had donated one for the search process there. And I think Parks and AvSAR and RevSAR that had come in also had search units too, had Reco units. And so we talked about splitting off a team while some folks went off to start tracking up the area for the dogs, but also to start using Reco on the ground. And in our briefing, we were told that he very likely had a Reco tab in the shoulder of his jacket, I think it was. So we went and did a pass inbounds, a couple of us, and so we made sure we had all electronics off of us and away from us, and we went in pairs of two to do these cycles with the Reco. We ended up doing one cycle inbounds, one cycle not out of bounds, but closer to the area boundary. And then we started doing some sleuthing, and we started thinking, what if the last point seen, which was reported to be here, was actually more, he was actually more inbounds when he was last seen with his friends, because it was really windy, and if those of you know that ski down on the skier's left of the stoke chair, like the wind comes right in your face there, and so it's kind of unpleasant. So we're thinking maybe he didn't go off as far left as initially reported. So we actually did a sweep more inbounds, and within a couple zigzags of our search pattern, he was booming in on the Reco within about 25 meters or so. Very, very strong. And so we managed to locate him there. He had, I never saw an autopsy. Did you ever see what was the cause of fatality there?
From what I remember, asphyxiation.
Asphyxiation? Yeah.
Yeah, asphyxiation.
Yeah, but he had appeared to be, that he died of asphyxiation. I could pretty much tell that without being a doctor. Because he'd been breathing for a period of time under the snow. And we could tell that because we assessed in front of his airway when we got to him. And there was quite a bit of, I call it ice masking, but not ice masking that stops you from breathing, like a snow plug, but just, like how in a snow cave, you start to build up that kind of like icy layer with moisture on it when you're breathing inside the snow cave. So the same kind of thing happens if people are breathing on that snow surface in front of them. And there was a little bit of kind of spit up blood sort of happening right at his airway when we got down to his airway. And that sort of that lamination of that he'd been breathing for a period of time, unknown period of time, but he'd been breathing under the snow. And he'd hit on the back of his neck under his helmet line. So he's wearing a helmet, doing everything right, skiing with friends. So it was just a very unfortunate incident. He was lying downhill. It wasn't really a tree well burial. It was more that he hit the tree and then some snow came over him, I think, a little bit, but he wasn't head down, like lawn darted into a tree well like can happen, just sort of hit the tree. And snow continued blowing and snowing on top of him, and there was no visual after that. So really hard to detect. He hadn't moved his poles, he hadn't moved his feet at all at that point. So he was breathing, hard to say if he was conscious or unconscious, and what actually kept him from moving, whether it was, paralysis from his possibly a spinal injury, or just being knocked unconscious but still breathing for a period of time. So, but that was Christmas Day, so it was dark when we were bringing the body down on toboggan behind the snowmobile with the ski patrol and the other searchers. And yeah, just kind of a surreal sort of experience, right? Christmas Day, loss of life, but really nice to have found him. And I think the ski hill was pretty happy to have him located there. So yeah, I got to participate in that with another. I was on that search strip with myself and another park warden at the time who was working at Rogers Pass there, James McCormick. So kind of nice to have an end to that. And it was in the end because he actually was relatively searchable because of having that reco tab there. Any questions on that reco before we carry on? No.
Thoughts on reco tags for searchers using a reco device?
Yeah, so searchers have to be very cognizant of having it on them, and I think be able to not have it on you, so have it be removable. Yeah, and know that you have it on you. And so one of the things we do when we're training with reco and when we're preparing for a response is we actually sweep ourselves or have somebody sweep us, and to see what kind of interference or feedback, and if there's a signal booming in on you with the sensitivity turned down, and you can't get rid of that, because I don't know if it's a plate in your head or whatever's reflecting there, you might not be the best searcher, or that jacket that you're wearing might not be the best thing. And I know Gord told me a story of going out on a search when he was doing some training and getting called to a search, and he took the reco tab out of his jacket because he was voted to be the guy searching because he's a reco guy. And yeah, you want to reduce all sources of interference, including reco tabs, for sure, in your clothing. So not a bad idea as a rescuer to have it with you and on you. Makes you more searchable if there's a subsequent avalanche, or if you're out just doing your regular job, ski patrolling or guiding or whatever. It makes you more searchable, but know where it is, and it's crafty. Sometimes it's got a big logo on it, or it's a raised kind of rubber bit, and sometimes manufacturers are putting it in kind of more low-key to make you more searchable too, and it's in the bottom of a pocket sewn in, and you might not actually be able to remove it. So there's shrouds that you can use to put over that, but I'd still suggest that if you're the reco searcher and you've trained a whole bunch with reco, you'll realize pretty readily that you don't want to have a reco tab on you while you're designated to search with the reco. But if you're searching with transceivers and dogs and the reco's not being used, absolutely have reco tabs on you.
Jordy, I was searching Eagle Pass from a helicopter with a reco, and there was CMH guides and Selkirk guides on the scene, and it was really useful to sort of point it at them, get a positive signal, and then point it at the snowmobiles and get nothing and feel good about the
Yep.
outcome of the search.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, so knowing what an actual signal is and tuning it up when you're out searching is pretty much essential. Yeah, and to make sure that the search unit is working. Oh, at the back there.
I'm not saying this just because Gord's sitting beside me, but one of the best ways to deal with that problem of searcher having reco tags on is just to get the reco out there sooner. So the less populated the search area is, the higher likelihood the operator is going to be able to find something in the snow. As soon as you've got your second party on scene, now you got 25 searchable people running around, it becomes really difficult to use the reco. So if you get it out there first in your initial party, then there's a lot less interference on the site.
Cool. Any other comments? How many people here have trained and used reco in their operations? Quite a few. Awesome. That's good to see. And how many people here have actually, like Troy said, there actually used it on a response? Yep. And so the more we do that, and as Kyle said, the quicker we get it on site, just like getting a dog on site or getting a dog rolling that way, they basically are the two things that should go out to every AvSAR response. Whether they get turned down or not, turned back or not is another story. But that's where we're going to have those live fines. We're not going to have live fines if we wait until the next day for sending dogs and reco out there. So know where it is and train a lot with it. Train through interference, train with interference, and you'll start to become quite comfortable with it, what it's telling you. It's not that it doesn't work. People will say, oh, it's not working, there's just too much interference. It's that we're not recognizing it. And so even if you have interference on a site, recognize that level of sound of the beeps, and then you're looking for a beep that's stronger than that. I went out and found, I was doing some training with ski guides here coming up to their exams last month, and a fellow had dropped the USB charging thing for his phone, a little battery pack, in between one of the three sites that we were working in. And he told me after, he said, oh, I lost this, do you have your reco with you? And I didn't have it with me in the truck, but I was driving back through there a couple days later to go to Golden to do another avalanche team practice. And so I brought my reco for that and my R9 unit. And so I went and searched through the site. And as I searched, it was a pretty clean site. It was just up the Icefields Parkway there. But I was getting some sort of beep that was probably something on me. And so I turned it down one notch. And when you turn it down one notch, you actually turn down the sensitivity quite a bit. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try a pass through these three sites, turn down a notch, because now I'm not getting that beep. And I got nothing as I passed through the sites. So then when I was coming back through, I didn't want to spend too much time there. I'd only been there on site for about 3 minutes to search all sites. So I turned it right up to full sensitivity and just basically said, okay, I've got this beeping sound, and I'm going to have a higher likelihood of getting a hit if I go back through the sites, and that's exactly what happened. So I got within a couple meters, 3 meters of it, and found it in the snow quite easily with a fine search. And so that's another key thing is have that sensitivity turned up as high as possible, and generally on the highest sensitivity. And if you have some other sort of feedback happening, some interference, just recognize that that's there, try and remove it. But if you can't remove that source of interference, just carry on doing your search and looking for something that overrides that in terms of the beeps. Question?
I just had a question as to why it took so long to get the reco unit to the accident site.
For the Revelstoke Mountain Resort one?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there was reco. It was searched from the air, but I don't think it was searched from the ground. And so I'm not going to be critical of the search that was going on. So I wasn't there the first few days, but I do think, yeah, it was a tool that ended up finding him. And so, yeah, I think as a case study, it's not to say that things were done wrong, but yeah, it was the thing that found him, for sure. So it just highlights the idea of getting it out as soon as possible.
I think I can answer that question. I think we've just had a paradigm shift in how we use it, and at that point in time, the way we used it was we left it on the shelf until nothing else worked, and then we grabbed it. And that's not how we're using it anymore.
Yep. Awesome. Okay, so we'll switch gears here a little bit. We're going to move into deep burials. So I've got a little video to play from an incident about a year ago that happened in the Rockies in Sentinel Pass with quite a deep burial. 4 meters was the number that I was told on his transceiver was the lowest number he could get. 1 person buried and 2 on the surface. Quite far in the backcountry because you have to ski 20 plus kilometers up because the road's closed up to Moraine Lake. Near Lake Louise there in the Rockies, near the town of Lake Louise, but 20 plus kilometers up, and they were going up Sentinel Pass on the which is on the hiking trail and the tourist summer climbing route for Mount Temple. So I'll just play this video here, and then we'll talk about deep burials.
she's alive. It's like shocking.
Tim Banfield still can't believe his friend escaped this avalanche alive. He and 2 other women were on a 35-kilometer backcountry ski trip last week when the slide hit.
I looked at my foot and I was like, oh, look at the really weird crack that came out.
In the 7th hour, an avalanche hit behind Mount Temple on Sentinel Pass.
I was rocketing down the face, ended up upside down, like going headfirst down, thinking don't catch your skis because if you tomahawk and you get hurt, it's gonna like your other friend's dead for sure.
One friend was partially covered by snow but safe. The other nowhere to be seen. All they had was their training to search with a beacon and a probe.
It's showing me a distance that's vertical, and so I knew that she was underneath us 4 meters in the snow, and at that time we realized that it's like super serious because normally like burials that deep don't end out very well.
There's almost no chance of survival, according to experts.
Here, I got a hit, and it was just like that.
But after more than 10 minutes of searching frantically, a sign of hope.
She was like maybe, becoming disconnected, and then all of a sudden, bap, in the back of the head. I hit her with the probe and kind of like brought her back.
Miraculously, she's still conscious.
So I find her head, and at this time, she's making noises in the snow, so we know she's alive.
Banfield clears the snow from her nose so she can breathe.
I was shocked. I was shocked, A, that we found her. I was shocked, B, that she was alive.
It took 2 hours to dig her out.
I was in the hole patting her down to see if she had a broken rib or a fracture and looking for blood, and there was nothing, and the whole time we were just shocked.
With the help of her friends, she escaped with only a few scratches.
It very easily could have been different.
Lisa McGregor, Global News.
Yeah, so an avalanche survival there with quite a deep burial. Was anybody here involved with that, with a response to it? No, it was Parks Canada response. But Parks Canada didn't get notified about it until they got down to her because she had the inReach in, the woman who was buried had the inReach in her backpack. So they kind of wanted to get down to her, partly to get down to her and get her air and help her out, and then partly to be able to call out for assistance at that point too. Because they had no other communications. There's no cell service there. So that kind of highlights, just the general idea of wanting to have multiple forms of communication in the group in case that person is missing in action with the communication device at that point. So I'm just going to go through the sort of brief overview of deep burial techniques that we're teaching on the Avalanche Advanced Search and Rescue, the Avalanche Search and Rescue Advanced Skills program. So this is by no means actually the course that I'm delivering here. I really encourage you to take that program, whether it's for your progression to move into your level 2 as a prerequisite to become a guide, a full guide, ski or alpine guide. It's also required to have that course towards your level 2. But I encourage you to, when there's space, we're working on space issues right now, because the courses are quite full, but definitely try and take it as a professional development course, because it gets into the nuts and bolts of how transceivers work. And I think a lot of people nowadays feel that their transceivers work quite well, and they do 99% of the time. But you have these things like deep burials, multiple burials, like we'll talk about coming up here, and because we're all on 457, all of our transceivers are sending and searching on 457. That could be a problem when there's multiples, and even when it's deep, because it can be a little getting on the periphery of our third antenna, because I think most of us are probably using 3 antenna transceivers out there right now, which does help solve the find search problem in a lot of ways. Everybody's transceivers have different functions, different features. And so know how your transceiver works, and it'll generally work quite well for you, but train to failure and train with these techniques so you're not in that situation where Tim and Meyer were on the surface. And they kind of had to, Tim's a buddy of mine. He's a mountain photographer, if you know him, Tim Banfield, based out of Calgary. Mostly climbing, ice climbing photographer. Has some really nice images, and so he's been in the mountains a lot. He'd taken, I think, AST 2 different times, but he said that it wasn't really discussed, and he hadn't really thought much about what to do if it's a very deep burial. So what I'm calling a deep burial is if it's deeper than your probe is long, right? Because you're not going to be able to just do a fine search and get a probe strike. So you're going to have to use some sort of techniques to overcome that and get down deep enough in approximately the right area so that you're not just digging cat holes in the snow kind of all over the place. So here's some statistics that are fairly old, showing about 25% of all burials are deeper than about 130 to 140. And previously, we were concerned about depth of burial, and I think we still are, being deeper than 150 because of survivability. I do think when our newer stats for like the last 10 years start to come out, that we hopefully will start to see more survivable deeper burials, like deeper than 152 meters. The reality is if you're buried that deep, even with good shoveling techniques and good deep burial technique and a long enough probe to get a probe strike, there's still a lot of work to do. And if you only have 2 people, like in that case in Sentinel Pass, you're going to feel pretty undergunned, for sure. So they dug very quickly and very well, and did basically what we recommend that you do in the AvSAR Advanced Skills program, but they hadn't taken the course. So yeah, they were thinking on the fly there, did a pretty good job. So if the burial's deeper than your probe length, you're going to want to do something that gets you as close to as possible over top of that buried subject and allows you to, at that point, it's more where you're putting your shoveling resources into play than actually finding the subject, right? So where are we going to put our shovelers so it's the most effective use of time and energy to remove snow where we should be removing snow? So we can have difficulty with fine search. We even see on the course, and I think everybody sees it when they're out instructing, some people have difficulty with fine search even when the subject's only buried 40 centimeters, right? So when we start to get down 3 meters, 4 meters, 5 meters deep, we can definitely expect to have some issues with our fine search. Difficulty probing, so there's greater area to cover, more likelihood of probe deflection in there, and your probe might not be long enough. And so we jokingly in the Rockies, we say we carry our Rockies probe, right? 2.4 meters, right? Because the snowpack, when you stick your stick in the snow, is it's not very far down till you hit dirt. Quite often in a lower snowpack area, but arguably in the Rockies, it's a fairly avalanche-prone region, and when avalanches pile up, they absolutely can be quite a bit deeper than our probe is. So I think 3 meters as a minimum is what we should be carrying as professionals. I tend towards the 330 length probe, but at a certain point you have to say, well, are you going to carry a 5-meter probe around? And it starts to maybe feel a little bit ridiculous. And the survivability, even if you have a bunch of shovelers there, is, we never give up as we're shoveling, but it's definitely lower chance of survival if somebody's buried 5 meters deep. So just trying to find the length of probe that you can justify carrying out there with you. So doing triage, right? So maybe we get to a deep burial, like was the case in the Strathcona Tweedsmuir School accident. Was anybody here on that February 1st, 2003? So that was, kind of a big day where things changed for youth groups in the backcountry in the wintertime with legislation changes that came forth. And I was the on-site, I was the rescue branch director for that incident in Connaught Creek, working with the Warden Service. And 7 school kids died with that. And the on-site searchers that were involved there, a couple of who are ACMG members, did an amazing job of doing triage and choosing not who lives and dies, but choosing to not spend a lot of time on a very deep burial that they came to very quickly, and deciding to carry on. And that was before, a while before we were talking about triage with multiple burials and deep burials in avalanche search and rescue. So they did an amazing job there. And I think because of that, I'm estimating that 4 or 5 people survived that would not have otherwise if they just dug out the first subject they came to that was quite a deep burial. And there were a number of very deep burials in that incident. And excavation, it just takes time. and we're better with it, but it does take time. So we talk about the mental map quite a bit, right? So knowing where you are on the slope, paying attention to everything around you and your transceiver, and using that information as it comes into you. So the universal method, we're not going to get into the analog specific method here. The universal method that works with all transceiver types is called the diamond method or the rectangle method. You hear it called a couple different things. And basically what you're doing is you're using your transceiver to determine the area where the numbers are fairly similar. And we're not going to get into flux lines either, but basically you're going to end up with a 4 meter, 5 meter deep burial. There's going to be a plateau of numbers as you go across a slope and up and down the slope. And so we're trying to determine the boundaries of either where the numbers jump. So they jump, you know, you're at 6.0, sort of in the center of that area, and it jumps to 8 at some point. That's kind of a boundary there. Or, so the edge of that plateau, and you're trying to determine that area of like numbers. Or it's at least a meter more reading than approximately the lowest number you're getting on that fine search. So if the lowest number you're getting is 5.5-ish in your fine search, you want to choose the area boundary at about 6.57 meters. And this is all approximation, but just recognizing that you're on the edge of it and then applying it consistently in the technique so that you're not going from 5.5 up the slope, up the debris, assuming you're on a bit of a slope there, and then you're going to where it hits 6.5, but then you're going to where it says 8 on the other side. As you go back down the slope. So try to apply it consistently, whatever number that you're using as your boundary for the diamond method. And then there's fine search in a circle, which works very well, especially for quite deep burials, but it's a very step-intensive technique, and so we're not going to go into that here. And you really only need to use these techniques when the subject is buried deeper than your probe, right? If you're getting a 2.6 and you have a 330 probe, just do a good fine search as per usual. Probe perpendicular, 90 degrees to the snow slope, and that's what's going to find the person, right? The transceiver just gets you close. So we want to start our shovelers, this is assuming we have other shovelers, start them to the downslope side. While you're doing your fine search. So as soon as you can determine this is a deep burial, which requires that you actually do enough of a fine search to determine the numbers are going up in all directions, you might come into a gully in an ice climbing incident where you're thinking, wow, there's a lot of debris piled up here. And so we might start to assume that we're going to have deep burials there. So you get on slope and you start searching with your transceiver, and you hear a beep. And as you get closer to them, it says 6 and 5, and you're thinking, wow, this is a deep burial. But if you don't carry on to find out that it goes down to 4 and 3 and 2 and 1, you're making assumptions there. So do a good enough fine search to determine this is a deep burial. The numbers definitely go up in all directions. Then from the approximate lowest number, doesn't need to be exact at this point, start shovelers downslope of you. And I like to think of it as a bit of a variable number, right? Because you don't want to start the shovelers way down slope, and you don't want to start the shovelers shoveling with a snow conveyor corridor that's too close to you so that you can't do this method. So about half the burial depth. So if the lowest number you're getting, like in Tim's case there at Sentinel Pass, was about 4, start them a couple meters downslope, about half the burial depth, approximately, downslope of you. And start them shoveling in a line, standard shoveling. Use this orthogonal bracketing method, which just means back and forth and then 90 degrees to that, to define what ends up being. So you're going to go side to side and then up and down the slope, and you're finding that plateau of where that plateau of numbers jumps, or is definitely a meter more than the approximate lowest number. And as you do that a couple times, back and forth, up and down the slope, and you can pattern it a little bit too and make it sort of like a rectangle, the area that you're searching, to try and find this area where the numbers all get bigger. And you're basically getting out of range of your third antenna, and that's why the numbers are changing. And so you're trying to determine that area, and so when you find the boundaries, side to side and top and bottom, put some sort of a marker in there. It doesn't need to be like an ICAR flag or anything, but just a ski pole, skis, that sort of thing to determine that area. And then choose the center of that as the center of your diamond. So now we've determined the most likely area that they're buried. Now we're going to go to move our shovelers who are downslope of us. Now we're going to move them to the uphill side. And you probably don't want to move them too far uphill because you want to remove the least amount of snow to where you can get a probe strike. So I would suggest you only go 1.5, 2 meters as a number, not half the burial depth like we're going downslope, but about 1.5 or 2 meters upslope. And now shovel your conveyor corridor through that area, back down through your initial snow conveyor corridor where you started down below. And go make it so it's about 2 meters wide, a meter either side of the center of your diamond as you pass through the center of your diamond there. And if you need to go more uphill, every meter that you go down, that you dig down, do another fine search in the bottom of your excavation corridor. And that's going to start to guide you to where you're moving your excavation corridor a little to the one side or the other, or you have to dig more up the slope because you're bumping up against the top of your excavation. And the same with if you start to realize it's more further down the slope, you don't need to dig as much snow up the slope from you. So you're just using it to fine tune. Every meter you go down, do a fine search. So here's the technique. And your shovelers are starting a snow conveyor corridor to the downslope side here. So now you have what essentially ends up turning out to be 4 points of a diamond, even though it was a rectangular area that you were searching out. But you've got those 4 boundaries marked, and now you're moving your shovelers to the upslope side. So here it is in a cross section here. I don't think there's no beeping there. Oh, for me, sorry. Thanks. So this is a side cross section here. And so as you dig down from the uphill side, you get your snow conveyor corridor down every meter, get down, and you get down deep enough to get a probe strike. So your transceiver says 2.5 or whatever, and you've got a 3 meter long probe. Then get a probe strike, and now you just carry on standard shoveling right down the probe. So there's sort of 3 places that you put your shovelers, initially down below you, and then up above you once you determine the center of the diamond to cut a swath through there. And then when you get down within striking distance, you get a probe strike, and then you move your shovelers to that probe strike, to the downhill side of that probe strike. So any questions on that technique? And so just to speak to some ways to practice this, does anybody have any tips or tricks? What we've started doing at the ski hills where we're running the AvSAR Advanced Skills course, like Whistler had 38 centimeters at Mid-Mountain in December when we were running the course. So it's kind of hard to get 4 meter deep burials. and it's really time intensive to set these up, right? And we've done stuff where we've even, through beer gratitude, we've had the cat drivers push up we had them pushing up piles of snow for us. That was what we called it, push up a pile of snow. So they did, with a transceiver beeping in the middle. But then we realized that as you go up and over and down the other side of the pile, the number never changes. So kind of difficult to demonstrate with that. So then we thought, okay, well, what we need is a huge platform, basically like a tabletop. And they understand that because they push that up in the terrain parks, right? These big tabletops. But you need an area that's probably 8 meters by 8 meters and 5 meters deep. And we were putting a pipe inside, either vertically or horizontally, to put transceivers in to show a horizontal sending transceiver and a vertical sending transceiver, because the flux lines are orientated differently, right, in a deep burial, depending on whether you're vertically buried or horizontally buried. And that's very intensive too, and you got to carry around this huge thing of pipe. But if you ever want to get on the Whistler gondola quickly, walk up there with a really long length of pipe, and they just usher you on. Because I think somebody was thinking that there's like a poop tube or something that's broken up there, and just, yeah, this is going to fix the problem. So this is an emergency plumbing situation. Yeah, and then you can just ditch that and go skiing for the rest of the day. So what we've ended up doing is using bamboo. Ski hills have lots of bamboo, and we'll just, as long as you have enough snow to stick the bamboo in the snow, you can tape multiple sections together, and then you can tape transceivers horizontally to send or vertically to send on that extended pole. And then you're just, basically the flux lines are doing the same thing coming down to you as they would as they're coming up through the snow. And it works really well as a training tool. I've used a ladder, extension ladder with a painter's pole off the top. That works too. There's a little bit more stuff in the way of working underneath it, but that works as well. You can string it between trees, but if you're in an area with trees, you start to run into the trees a little bit too, right? So, does anybody have any other deep burial techniques they want to, like ways to set up training? Yeah, it seems to work pretty good for us. And if you don't have enough snow, like we didn't in Whistler, to actually stick 3 lengths of bamboo in the snow because it would have fallen over, we tripoded 3 bamboos and then ran a couple more off the top of that teepee there, and it seemed to actually work pretty good too. So now next on the menu, we'll talk about multiple burials and give a quick overview. Again, this is not a complete course. You do not get a certificate at the end here from the Avalanche Association, but we'll do an overview of deep burials here now, of multiple burials. So again, we've got another incident, kind of a mini case study here by video. I don't know if any of you were involved with this incident a number of years ago in Rossland with a cat skiing operation, but there were multiple people involved in an avalanche there. Was anybody here part of that, responding or guiding? Okay. So I don't know that much about it. I wasn't there, but this was, I don't think the media knows that much about it either, but this is the media report on it.
A dozen Utahns feel lucky to be alive after a massive avalanche in the Canadian backcountry buried part of their group and seriously injured 2 of them. The experienced group of friends were snowcat skiing in British Columbia Thursday when a slab of snow gave way. News specialist Jed Bull talked with a few of the skiers who remind us just how quickly the mountains can turn deadly. Jed?
Yeah, Dave, those 12 Utah skiers, all friends and family, were skiing in the Selkirk Mountains of British Columbia. They were enjoying some of the best ski runs of their lives when suddenly the snow beneath them broke loose and they were fighting for their lives.
Mount Mackey.
We had a pretty solid group.
Mount what? Mount Mackey. 12 Utah friends with 2 guides from Big Red Cats.
Cat fits 12, and it was a hand-picked group of 12.
Expert backcountry skiers, several with patrol experience, plus 2 doctors.
We had skied some of the best runs of our lives.
A dream trip.
All of a sudden I heard a really loud whoomph.
Until Thursday afternoon.
I heard Jason yelling as loud as he could the word avalanche.
Avalanche! The group, skiing buddy style, had just gathered.
The whole thing ripped out.
75 yards wide.
Get out! Get out!
I was head over heels. Just a sea of white, head over heels, just going down.
Brandon Flitton bounced through the trees and landed on one.
I was literally wrapped around it like a horseshoe. And I could feel the compression of the snow on my back.
Still breathing, but for how long?
I was able to move my right arm a little bit and punch through the snow.
He feared he was the only survivor.
I started yelling.
Is everyone on search?
Before the second slide hit, we thought everyone was dead.
The slide buried 7.
That was the scariest part, right? You think all of your friends are gone.
Jumping into action, they shouted and tracked their friend's beacon.
He's fine board here.
After 15 minutes, everyone accounted for. 2 completely buried and 1 unconscious.
The other one that was at the bottom was actually my brother.
Swept 500 to 600 yards by the snow. 8 grueling hours and 3 toboggans to safely get everyone off the mountain. The skiers were thankful for extensive training with beacons, shovels, and probes that included briefings with their guide just that morning.
It's chaos, and to be able to be efficient and effective, the training has to be muscle memory.
They urge everyone who plays in the backcountry to train like their lives depend on it.
Are you skiing with guys that could save your life if they needed to?
These guys were.
There's a brotherhood that is pretty amazing between us. There's a bond and a friendship that is unlike anything else.
The skier who was most seriously injured is still up in Spokane awaiting some surgery up there. He's in the ICU. Another skier had a broken leg while the rest of the skiers were beaten up emotionally and physically. They also wanted to tell me that they felt very impressed with their guides out there, and they don't believe that they would have all made it home alive if not for the work of those guides who were out there with them that day. Dave?
Wow, what a story. Jed Bull in the newsroom. Thank you, Jed.
Okay, so multiple burials there, so they had to do whatever needed to be done. I wasn't on slope there, and I didn't respond with the SAR team, but everybody survived. There were some injuries there. So let's go through some techniques for multiple burials. So the challenge we have, I think I mentioned it already, is that we're all on 457 kilohertz. So we're all on the same, emitting the same radio signal. And so transceivers still, even though there is technology to try and mark and determine which transceiver is which through our search when there's multiple signals coming out of the snow, it can still fail. It fails often because of signal overlap, but it can also have to do with interference and other associated inputs that are coming into our transceivers, which cause them to lose the marks or constantly bring us back to a transceiver that's previously been marked, or all the marks just go away after we've done part of our search. So which can be quite frustrating for us, right? You've done a bunch of work, you've done a bunch of good work, you're using your transceiver if it has marking or signal suppression, you're using that and it works generally quite well most of the time. But with mixed transceivers in particular, and you never know what you're going to be searching for if you're a SAR team or working at a ski hill or in a highways avalanche operation, if people are wearing transceivers. If they're all the same transceivers in your group, it's a guided group or an operation, you might have less of that issue of losing marks, but you still, signal overlap can still be a problem at any time. And we can only find one at a time as we're searching. We might have other searchers designated to search another part of the debris, so we're finding, yes, multiples at the same time, but us as a searcher, an individual searcher, we can only find one at a time and get a probe strike and then carry on with shoveling happening. So we've got some alternate search strategies that have been developed over the years. And marking does, or signal suppression does really help with this, but like I said, it's not the perfect solution because we're all on the same frequency. And so we need to practice these things. For deep burials, for multiple burials, we don't respond to them that often, and therefore they should actually be trained for quite a bit, and we should actually be feeling quite confident with that, working through these problems. Because yeah, if you just get thrown into anything without training for it or training a lot for it, you end up feeling pretty consciously incompetent. So we want to get to the point where we're consciously competent. We know what we're doing with these types of scenarios that could, when we're out there with groups or just a single individual with us, partners of two, deep burials and multiple burials can happen to any of us. So we want to have a systematic analysis, right, all the time, but particularly in multiple burial situations. And you can think to that incident in Roslyn there, right? There's probably a lot going on, right? A big chunk of the group involved, multiple people missing, spread out across a slope in a gladed, treed area, right? So visual, not being able to even contact each other by voice and visually. Kind of poor weather it looked like, kind of flat light. So yeah, a lot going on there. So updating your mental map. Has anybody on an avalanche incident had trouble initially with accountability? Figuring out how many, where are they, who's missing. Yeah, it happens all the time, right? That initial accountability. You can be the best guide in the world, and there's an avalanche with your group below you or above you, and you can spend a period of time just trying to figure out how many people are actually missing. It can take a while, right? So updating your mental map, updating how many people are you searching for, where are the searchers, where are the rescuers, what resources do you have, how many signals are you getting? And so what we need to do, we always say everybody needs to go to search, and absolutely everybody needs to go to search. If there's somebody with a whole lot of air that's searching on the surface, but they're sending with their transceiver, maybe they're shoveling or probing, but you're going to be finding them and realizing, oh no, I've wasted some time finding somebody who has lots of air and no injuries at that point. So everybody has to go to search. And yeah, how far apart do they appear to be? How big's the debris? Are you getting, as soon as you get a signal, are you getting multiple signals at any point in your search? And so having functions on your transceiver like scroll list, like scan mode, big picture mode, all the manufacturers call these things differently, but basically being able to flip back and forth somehow between and knowing that there's multiples out there. There's icons that can pop up on some transceivers too telling you that there's multiples, but it doesn't always tell you the exact number. So the more information you can have coming into you from your transceiver and using that information, the better. And then are they in close proximity? So close proximity being 10 to 20 meters. Within 10 to 20 meters of each other, or very close proximity within 5 meters of each other, because they're similar, but they're slightly different techniques that we'll use. So as we go through our search, so we're just doing an initial search of debris that we've been tasked to do. So do we have a clear signal? Okay, so after you've done your signal search, you've got a signal, a number, an arrow, a beep, whatever is coming out of your transceiver interface. They're all a little bit different. Now we go into our course search phase. This should mostly be review, hopefully. Do you have, when you get the number on your screen, 10 to 15 meters, do you have any indication that there's multiples within that 10 to 15 meters range? That's something to update. It's a point where you definitely want to update your mental map at about 10 meters and then again at about 3 meters. So if the answer is no, then locate that first signal. So you're doing your standard search strips on the slope, either going up or down, whichever way you've come into the avalanche debris. Locate your first signal. And then once you have it located and probed and get shoveling going, assuming that you have some shovelers to help you there, then carry on back onto where you left your course search and get back onto your standard search strips. And that means you have to remember where you left it. And so again, mental map update points when you're leaving to go off for a signal like this, make sure you know where you left off and get back to it so you can carry on with the search. So close proximity multiple burials, if the answer is yes, you do have multiple beeps, locate the first signal, do your triage decision, and then you ask yourself, has your marking function failed at any point, or you maybe don't have a marking function on your transceiver. So if the answer, this is kind of a double negative here, if your marking function has not failed you, then just carry on with your standard search using your marking function, if you have it, where signals are in close proximity and where they're detected. And then do triage decision as you get to each located subject. Using basically your transceiver is a distance ohmometer, right? It's telling you a lot of good information. It gets more accurate as you get closer to the buried subject. So in your find search, if it says 1.6, that's really good information, right? That tells you how deep you should be probing. It tells you how deep you're going to have to shovel. So really good information coming out of your transceiver. So we're in the alternate search strategy section. We're operating down here. So we've come all the way through our flow chart, all the way through our search phases of transceiver search to determine that, oh no, we're trying to use our regular search strategy if we have a marking function and it's failed us. Or we keep getting brought back to the same subject where there's a probe strike and shoveling is happening. So what are we going to do? So you can start micro search strip at that point. Or three-circle method. We're not going to go through the three-circle method because the micro-search strips seem to be applicable to more types of terrain and situations and slope steepnesses. So we'll talk about micro-search strips. And then as you get to each subject, you're again doing your triage decisions for burial depth. And then as you actually touch the subject, you're doing your medical triaging. And then get back onto your standard search strip, right? So we've left that to find multiples. Now get back onto it. So you got to remember where you left it and then carry on searching the debris because it could be a really large area of debris. The avalanches that we go to are not always 30 meters by 30 meters in a flat meadow. And so another training tip there, train in treed areas, train in steep areas, train in large areas where searchers can't just yell to each other and they actually have to use radios as a training methodology. And then this is where everybody's head turned this aside here. So we're constantly updating all the information that's coming into us, updating our mental map all the way through the search process, and definitely at about 10 meters and about 3 meters on our screen. So a few different techniques have been developed here by some folks that have thought a lot about this stuff, and they've become quite prolific, like highly used in the industry, these techniques. And so what we're teaching on the AvSAR Advanced Skills course is the more advanced method of micro search strips. So we're using variable search strip width. So we're going, as we come in, we get multiple beeps. So we have an idea there's signals in close proximity. We've already found one, and now we're basically, to use these alternate search strategies, we're forcing ourselves to use them. Because most of the time you would come in here, you would mark or signal suppress and go to the next one, and mark and signal suppress and go to the next one, and it would be all done. So we're assuming that you've located one, and then you keep getting pulled back to it, or you've dropped your marks at some point in this search for close proximity transceivers. So come back to that point where you had multiples. So again, that you have to remember when you first got multiple beeps within 10 to 15. And now walk across a slope. You can do this going up the slope, or you can do it going down the slope. But don't run your search strips this way, if this is a slope going up and down the slope, because you're causing yourself to do extra vertical, right? It's going to be slower overall. So work with the contours of the slope going across it and down and across it and down, or across it and up and across it and up if you're coming in from the bottom. So how far do we go across the slope here? What's our measure for variable search strip width technique? Any ideas? Yeah. So when your distance ohmometer says 10 to 15 meters, that's telling you it's like a turn signal sort of thing, right? Time to turn. And then we're generally going with 5 meter search strip widths here. However, it really depends. The more complex the situation, you know, if you're going to ice climbers, there's 4 of them in a very small area, you might turn down your search strips to 1 meter or 2 meters so that you're not missing anything. And fairly critical here that for those of you with Mammut products, that you turn to mode 2 to do this. So you can't be in your standard search strip, standard search mode to do this because it just wants to mark and go to the next one on the scroll list. And so you need to turn to what we call mode 2, so hold both side buttons with a pulse or with a Berry Box S, go into your alternate search mode. So now it's looking for just the closest, strongest signal. For the rest of you that have pure digital transceivers, Ortovox, PEEPs, trackers, you're already in an alternate search mode. You're always looking for the closest, strongest signal. So you're already there. You don't need to flip modes. So as you go across, when you get to 10 to 15 meters, that's an indication to turn down the slope and come back through and get off of your search strip when the number gets down at or below the number that your search strip is wide. So if you're doing 5 meters down the slope, it's whenever you get to a number that's less than 5 meters. If you're coming across here and it's still at 7 and 8, and then 9 and 10, you're not turning off your search strip to go find it. And then when you find each one, get back onto your search strip, onto that grid, and walk it. And then the tough thing is ignoring signals as you come past. And it's worth stay on your search strip and just move your transceiver a little bit closer to it without fully committing. Just say, yep, that's one I've already found. So it's good confirmation, and then carry on away from it. The numbers will get bigger, and then the numbers will get smaller as you get closer to the next one. In terms of your transceiver orientation, I'd suggest you keep the transceiver pretty low to the snow as you do this. There's different schools of thought. Some people say don't turn the orientation of your transceiver. I personally feel there are 3 antenna transceivers that we're using. They're vectoring all the time, and I see Kyle nodding there. You agree? Good.
If you're comfortable with the analog signals and you're using that feature to help you search, which place you're probably on mode 3 in your transceiver with manual control of the volume, then it matters. But if you have a 3 antenna transceiver and you're following the distance indicator, orientation does not matter.
Yep, so just keep it in front of you so that you can actually read it, and then carry on with it in front of you the whole way so you can read it. So it's okay to change the orientation, but keep it fairly low to the snow, right? When we're holding it at waist height, we're holding it a meter off the snow, often at least, or even more. And so now you've increased the distance to these transceivers that you're trying to isolate in a complex situation. So definitely put it fairly close to the snow surface, but fine to turn the orientation of the transceiver as you go around with your search strips. So pretty basic technique. When do we stop doing this and get back onto our standard search strips? There's a commonality here. It's when you see about 10 to 15 meters on your screen, right? That tells you you've cleared that area, and now carry back, go back to where you left your search strip initially, your standard search strip, and carry on through the debris. And feel good that you've found everything that you were supposed to find there. But it works best if you've practiced this. Practice with transceivers sending in different orientations. Practice with a whole bunch of transceivers in a small area. Practice with transceivers that are buried on top of each other. you know, all that kind of stuff, the situations that you could come across. So you have some previous experience in the Rolodex for when you actually go, when you go out there for the search. The Strathcona-Tweedsmuir School accident in 2003 was the biggest avalanche incident I've been to. I didn't go to the Boulder Turbo Hill one, where there was, I think some of you have responded to that. There was upwards of a couple hundred sledders involved. But yeah, this was a group of 17 involved in Connaught Creek. It was the biggest avalanche incident I'd been to at that point in my career, and it was also the first. And so that's where training, the value of training, I can tell you, really kicks in, because we, in Parks Canada, had trained quite a bit. We used the incident command system. We kept it very organized. We had communications issues, but we worked through that. We had accountability issues for finding people, how many had we found, all that kind of stuff, and we worked through that. And we ended up, fortunately, keeping everybody safe on the slope there after the first avalanche had occurred. So. But the value of training was huge there for me and for the whole team that was out there, for sure. All the guides that assisted and participated, and some members of the public went on the slope as well that had training and experience. And yeah, everybody worked quite well together, and it was because of a lot of previous training by everybody. So this shows just sort of the bigger picture of inserting micro search strips within your bigger search strips. Yep. Oh, here's a mic here.
Sorry. So you're doing your search and you're doing your micro strip searching, but then you're within 3 meters and you're doing your sound check. Are you then dropping to your knees to do that 3-meter sound check to see if you're going to do the micro box technique?
Well, you're basically keeping it low to the snow through your entire search, and then when you get within 3 meters, you're doing a fine search now at that point. And we'll talk about if you hear multiple beeps or you have an indication that there's multiples within that 3 to 5 meters of you too. So that'll be the next technique here.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's micro search strips. Strip searching is a totally different technique. Okay, and we're not going to get into the 3-circle method here, but it does exist. So basically, you're locating one, going out about 3 meters, and walking a circle, and then going out about another 3 meters and walking a circle. So you're covering it in a circular fashion instead of a grid back and forth search style. So it works quite well too. It doesn't work quite as well though in steeper terrain, because it causes you to go down the slope and up the slope and down the slope and up the slope, like we were trying to avoid. So if it's steeper terrain, consider using micro search strips, and probably most of the time use micro search strips. But yeah, and the other thing it doesn't work as well in is if there's obstacles. So if it's in a treed area of debris, because humans don't walk very rigid circles. We're better, I think, trying to keep it in a square fashion there overall. So it's very easy to ovalize these and not cover things as well as you thought you covered it. So if it's really lumpy debris, you're crawling up over things, if it's crevassed, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, micro search strips definitely are the preferred method overall. Somebody had a question?
Yeah, with that method, does it matter the orientation of your transceiver at that time? Because I have practiced that, and I was wondering if you should keep it to where you've already found the first person, or do you put it on the outside, or just go with it?
So like how far it is off the snow?
No, like just keeping your orientation.
Oh, like as you're walking the circle here?
Yeah.
Yeah, again, just like micro search strips, I would suggest that you just keep it readable in front of you and walk in a circle with it right in front of you, just pointed ahead. Yeah, as you walk the circle there. Yeah. You could, like Kyle said there, if you're using more of the tones, maybe consider don't turning the orientation of it. But you still have, even those of you that use an analog capable device, it still has 3 antennas there too that are constantly searching out. So it's less of a concern overall, and probably better to pay attention to where you're walking and not be walking backwards and sideways, trying to keep the orientation of the transceiver the same all the way through these techniques. Because if you trip over something or fall into a crevasse or into the creek or poke yourself in the eye with a tree as you're going by, yeah, you're not going to be much use to the search. So, okay, so next technique, last technique is microbox, microcircle. So it's basically a variation of the micro search strips. Basically, we're covering the area very well, but we have an indication this time that there's multiples within 3 to 5 meters. And that can be, I don't know if for those of you that practice with this, it can be difficult, right? You know there's another one close by, there's an icon or there's a second beep, and it can be difficult to after you've located one, often that's not that difficult, but then to find the next one and figure out where in relation to the first one you want to search next and do your find search can be difficult. So you're walking a circle or a box around the first subject that's been pinpointed by probe. So we need to find one first and then have that as a starting point before we do these techniques. And we're using it when there's a second burial, second subject suspected within less than 5 meters. And you can do that within micro search strip, 3-circle method, or in your standard search method. Anytime you're updating your mental map at that 3 to 5 meters and you think that there's a second person there, you do a scan mode, you do a big picture mode, you hear multiple beeps when your transceiver is dialed down with an analog capable device when it's dialed down to 3 to 5 meters. That's all good indications that you have multiples within about 5 meters of you. So find one, and then apply this technique. So you're basically doing a circular box around the transceiver that you've already found until your transceiver indicates a signal that cannot be the first one that you probed. So we've got 2 variations on this technique. The first one is for a digital-only device. So a PEEPS, an Ortovox, a BCA tracker are all pure digital devices, and so you don't have that beeping sound coming out of it. Although the new PEEPS actually you can have analog capability with it, and I haven't played enough with it to determine which this would go under. I suspect it would work very well just looking at the numbers and using this pure digital technique with the new PEEPS or Black Diamond Bluetooth transceiver that's out. Does anybody here have one of those? Yeah. You like it? All right. It's okay, he said. Okay. So we're starting here in this diagram from where you've probed subject 1. You move out so you get a probe strike, put your transceiver low to the ground, don't turn the orientation of it because this is a fine search technique that we're doing. Move out 1 meter, so a measured meter, and walk a box or a circle looking for a number that varies from when you first walked away a meter. So if you're over top of the subject, it's saying they're 2.2 meters down. You walk away 1 meter, and now it says 3.6 on your screen. Don't turn the orientation of your transceiver. Walk the box or the circle with the transceiver very low to the ground because you're fine searching for the second transceiver. And look for the number that varies to be below 3.6. And if you don't get that variation, then go from where you started, your first box or circle, walk a second meter. Maybe it says 4.7 now. And now walk a 2 meter square circle around until that number deviates and drops below that 4.7. And if you have any doubt as you're doing any of these circles or boxes, and you think, oh, I think it went down just a little bit, just keep your feet on your circular box, but just move your transceiver a bit this way, and move your transceiver a bit this way. And if it goes down here, but it actually starts to go down here, it gives you a pretty good idea that the second subject is buried on that side. So pretty simple technique overall, but it requires practice, right? And the initial thing is to recognize with your mental map update that within 3 to 5, you have multiples buried within 3 to 5 meters of you. If you have no clue that that's the case, you're going to locate one, and then you'll just carry on oblivious to the fact that there was a second one buried there. So it's training yourself with your transceiver type to know that there's multiples buried there within 3 to 5 meters of you. So then the analog capable users, they can go into mode 2, we call it, and you have to have your transceiver set up in pro mode into the mode where you hear multiple beeps, or sorry, where you hear analog tones, so that you can hear multiple beeps. If you have it set up in a basic mode where you're hearing a digital beeping sound and not an analog, the actual raw tone of the 457 beep, then you would use it in the previous method as a digital only device. So that would work fine too with digital beeping sounds, and you're paying just attention to the numbers now. But if you have it set up where you're hearing analog tones, you come in within 3 to 5 meters, you have an indication that there's multiple beeps, and it says 3 meters or 5 meters on your screen. Update your mental map there, locate the first subject, get a probe strike, and now you have a point to go from that's going to be the center of your box or circle. The difference is, though, you want to flip into mode 2, so your automatic backup mode, so it's dialing up and down the sensitivity for you automatically, not into your mode 3 where you are dialing up and down the sensitivity and it's fixed. So you got to be very careful you don't end up in mode 3, but go into mode 2, get the transceiver low to the snow, and you do very similar to the pure digital technique, walk away, but you're not walking away a measured meter, you're walking away until you get 2 solid beeps. And when you get that second beep, now whatever distance you are away, that's the measured distance around the first subject. So maybe you walk away 2 meters and you get a good solid second beep. Now you're looking at the number on your screen. Maybe it says 4.2. And as you walk around here, holding it in the same orientation and very close to the snow, you're looking for the number to deviate from that 4.2. And if you've done the technique and you've practiced with this, it works very well. Where you back out X distance, you get 2 beeps, so you're at that distance now. And then because as you back out in automatic backup mode, it's dialing up the sensitivity trying to capture this one, still trying to capture this one. It happens to dial up the sensitivity enough to capture this one. So you're using it as a measuring device, the sensitivity levels, and it works quite well. So now it's telling you when you walk this box or circle, you're going to end up pretty darn close to the second buried subject. So any questions on those techniques or anything? Because I think we're close to the end of the time here.
One thing I've noted is if you're using the mark feature on them, sometimes it fails, like you said. But I've noticed in tests that the best thing you can do is just shut it off and turn it back on again, and it brings everybody back up again.
That's another way to deal with it, but there is always a potential that it drops the marks again because of signal overlap again,
yes.
Right? And it could just cause you to keep cycling your transceiver off and on, and you're not finding subjects. Yeah. But yeah, that is another way that you could initially try to, okay, the marking feature failed, turn it off, turn it back on again, have another go at it, but I wouldn't probably go beyond that. Now I would start to use these alternate search strategies.
Hey,
Kyle?
Jordo. Yeah, just 2 things, well, 3 things, I guess. First, the orientation of the transceiver never matters when you're looking at the numbers at all, because it's got 3 antennas. It only matters when you're listening to the beeps, because then we're working in pure analog, so it's the coupling of the transceivers matters. So in all of those techniques, when you're looking at the numbers, orientation doesn't matter. When you're listening to the analog beeps, the orientation matters. And the best way to practice this is to do it with the transceivers on the surface, so you know where they are. And then you can stand there and you look at your transceiver and you're like, oh, look, as I turn it, the numbers don't change. And as I move over here, the numbers get bigger, and I turn it and the numbers don't change. And you can do that because you see where everything is on the surface. So it's only our ego that makes us find transceivers that we don't know where they are. Practice with them known, just like dog handling, Gord. And the other thing is, the other valid strategy to all these problems is just find the first one and dig it up and turn it off, and then go to the next one.
Yeah, good point. And we don't allow that in the AvSAR Advanced Skills course to keep it more complex. So you can't turn off transceivers when you're doing the practical skills assessment. But in reality, when you get down to a buried subject, you're going to want to turn their transceiver off. And that's where it's worthwhile knowing every type of transceiver that comes onto the market. Not so much how to search with it, unless you're doing a lot of instruction, but know how to turn those things off, because they're all different switches and ways to turn them off.
Obviously, a triage is an important decision to make at some point, but when you're teaching less skilled users, just turning it off, even if you got to dig deeper on the first one, may be a faster overall search strategy than someone doing the more complex search strategies with little practice.
Yeah, it makes it way less confusing to have less signals coming out of the snow. Anybody else? A couple more.
Do you find there's any value in using older transceiver to get a signal drop naturally versus practicing? I found that in some of the avalanche course I've taught over the years, that if I give them a digital transceiver, they rarely drop a
Yeah,
signal.
if you bury older transceivers that have a longer beep length, it can cause signal overlap more of the time and potentially cause the marking feature to fail. It's okay to train with those, but I wouldn't train with them all the time because most people aren't using those types of transceivers anymore. But yeah, it's a different thing to insert in there, an older 457 transceiver that has a long beep, and maybe a couple of them, and you'll probably see some anomalies happening there and need to switch to these alternate search strategies.
Thanks.
You mentioned earlier that transceivers of different brands or types will often drop signals more frequently. Do you know, have any insight into why that's happening, or is it a brand thing or a model thing?
Well, that's the big question. I don't want to get too into transceiver compatibility, but the more we do training on this course and the more we push the limits of transceivers, we are seeing that sometimes, and it's a bit inexplicable, certain transceivers are favoring certain transceivers and not as recognizing of other transceiver brands. And it's kind of hard, that's up to the software developers and to figure out. But generally, we do lots of these courses, we search for lots of multiple burials. It generally works quite well, and these techniques do, and most of the time we wouldn't even need to use these techniques, but we're specifically causing the students to actually have to search this way, and I think we should all do that. In some transceivers they actually transmit on a separate channel, right, a Wi-Fi link, and that helps them if they all have a 457 beep coming in and unique identifier on a Wi-Fi link. It helps them keep track as you move around which one is which. But the reality is, unless you're specifically in a sole type of transceiver operation, we could still, if I'm heli ski guiding, I could still get called to the nearest neighbor or a snowmobiler group or whatever, and they're using different transceiver types. So, yeah, got to be prepared for it. Did that answer that?
Yeah, totally.